Good evening, everyone, to all the panelists, guests, and everybody who's watching us across India on social media getting live streamed. Sorry about the delay in kind of beginning. I think in the not so distant future, as far as Bangalore is concerned, I think coming to office would probably have 10% KRA weightage, right? Given the distances that most of us travel. But welcome to the India Employment Forum, co-hosted by TeamLease. I was having a chat with one of my colleagues, a couple of days back. If you pick up, any business newspaper, you would see, unbridled enthusiasm about growth, about, every single sector doing, disproportionately well, right? Of course, there's been some bad news this last week, largely about fintech and so on and so forth. But overall, if you pick up, media, you'll see disproportionate, stories about growth happening. I was just having a chat with one of the panelists saying not the right time for it to happen, especially with AOP around the corner, but still discussions on growth are one of the overwhelming themes if you pick up any media newspaper. Let's look at some of the news which I picked up this week. I think one of the first ones I saw was Reliance crossing 20 lakh crore market cap. Just to put that in context, that's literally the GDP of New Zealand or Qatar closer home. The other news we picked up was, Valentine's Day sale for quick commerce crossed 30%. Actually, you should have read the subcontext. It was even funnier, which of course, amongst many things, shows the growth problems, that we are happening, right? It was lovers looking for flowers, quick commerce companies looking for drivers, drivers looking for bikes, right? So if it's not funny, it's true. And that's exactly the kind of problems they're facing. Then auto sales have been at the highest this January. Right? And then a beverage company is looking at literally doubling its investment. So there's no particular sector which seems to be doing bad. And of course, there are underlying challenges to this. And we were chatting about it a while back with a few panelists over here. But if you really look at it, outside of issues around regulation, ease of doing business, and perhaps infrastructure, it is no doubt that India is going to consolidate its position over the next couple of decades leading up to 2047 to become a $35 trillion economy, right? This would literally be achieved even if we grow at our 6 or 7% that we've been speaking about. But outside of this, if you look at interwoven with our, dream about being able to reach this $35 trillion economy is our single most important asset, our people. Our people are going to be the significant cornerstone of what we are going to be able to achieve. The last time I felt such enthusiasm, to be honest with you, was really around the time I was graduating in 1999, where there was so much enthusiasm about jobs, etc. And all that lasted for a period of time till about 2007, 2008. And then, of course, there were challenges around that particular time, not necessarily India, but across the globe for us to be able to reach, kind of where we reach. Today, as we have gathered here to discuss just that, saying amongst many things which are going to be really responsible for India to grow, I think the number one issue which we need to be solving for as a country are around people issues. And therefore, the topic that we have chosen for ourselves to kind of debate and discuss is literally demystifying people's supply chain issues. And the reason for this is, we are participating in a whole lot of CII and, FICCI conferences. While there is a lot of discussion on hard infrastructure to be built up, on regulations, ease of doing business. Some of you might have seen, the Jan Vishwas bill getting passed, etc. and all that. I think the level of discussion which is required to be spoken about, especially with respect to people, is not getting the kind of sufficient attention that we expect it to get. And this is going to be one of the single most important, topics that we need to pick up as a country if we need to kind of be able to deliver what we are expecting to do, right? Amongst many things, some of the questions which are coming forward as we speak with a lot of leaders is, does India have an unemployment issue or does India have a skilled, talent issue, right? Does India have an attrition issue or, does India have a once in a lifetime opportunity issue? Does India have a wages issue or does India have a productivity issue? I think these are some of the single most important questions that we need to, look at to be able to answer. I think one thing all of us can agree, given the example that I gave earlier, was amongst many things, we can reasonably agree that some of our biggest challenges are really challenges due to growth more than anything else, right? And therefore, it's a happy kind of situation to heal. Sometimes, of course, enthusiasm, gets the better of many of these, publications. One of the headlines that I recently picked up was how startups stopped worrying about attrition. And I was like, wait a minute, how does that happen, right? Now, either it's a case where, if the point when reality is too bad, then there is always fantasy. That's one. or it's a case where somebody's really planted, some story to be able to negotiate perhaps for their AOP going next year, saying attrition is now here to stay. But if you look really outside of this, as a professional who really believes saying we need to examine not just our failures, but our successes more closely, I think it's really important for us to understand saying what are some of those issues which are going to impact from a people perspective, right? And I'll come to, what are the subtopics around it. But one interesting fact whenever it comes to India, and I think it's really good for us to understand, is to have the context, because when we speak India, I think, there are really large numbers being spoken about. Let's look at, one number which, I always kind of find it very fascinating to think through. We are a population of roughly about 145 crores, right? If you look at the sheer amount of labor force, which is working population, that's, working age population is 90 crores. The actual labor force is roughly about 52 odd crores. In that, if you look at the formal workforce, is 8 crores, which is approximately, some of us, in this room belong to that formal workforce. If you want to kind of look at that 8 crores number and see, further as to how it correlates, the number of the people who are there in EPFO is roughly about 7 crores. The number of people who pay income tax, for example, is roughly about, number of people who file income tax is 7 crores. Actually, the people who pay is only 2 crores. So now look at the reverse of it. 145 crores population is hardly 2 crores people who pay, right? Again, if you try and put that in context, that's 1.5% to population. If you look at, and of course, we are, closer to $4 trillion economy. If you look at, for example, some of the developed countries, I think in the United States, for $27 trillion economy, it's about 65-70% of the people who pay income tax out of the 300 billion who are there. So just to put a context, closer home, China is close to 10 and 11% because of different tax structures, etc. On that, but still 1.5% is way too low as to what it is. So that's, I think one of the numbers. I think the other number we need to really look at as we kind of move forward is the entire, concept of apprenticeship, right? I think the thought and belief saying everybody is going to finish their high school, go and do graduation, and then be going to be employed in a job, I think is a little bit far-fetched. If you look at, International Labour Organization of what they suggest for most developing countries, the sheer number of people who get employed, right after their high schools into some sort of a skill learning before they go on to jobs is anywhere between 2.5% to 15%. In India, it's about 7 people for every 10,000 people, right? That's way too less. And much before China became the manufacturing out, it was Germany who kind of cracked this. For being the size of country it is, there's disproportionate number of apprentices because that's the way they kind of built up, right? The other, important thing is, we, last year, I think pretty much around the same time, Goldman Sachs came out with a report on 2 different things. One was obviously, everybody speaks about the $35 trillion thing. They also spoke about 2075 when India will become the second largest, displacing even the United States to become $52 trillion, right? I think the report was interesting for many things as to what it highlighted, that, what would be required for us to do to be able to even reach that number. But for a moment, I think there's a lot of disbelief saying, do we even expecting ourselves to become $35 trillion by 2047? Actually, one only needs to step back a little bit to know that at some point in time, we were already there, right? Let me give some context back. 1700, we were close to about 27% of global economy, right? Now, some might say, listen, who's seen 1700 just looks too far in the past. Never mind, please look at 1912, published data of there. India was still about 14-15% of global economy. So in today's terms, it would have been, global economy is about $84 trillion, all GDP. In today's terms, it would be $14 trillion, slightly just behind China. So we were there. So this is not so much about, India emerging as much as about a renaissance, about India coming back to its form, right? So that's the important part. Now, that's not news to me. It's bound to happen. But what does the other aspects of report shows as to why, we would be, or what would be the, single important constraint for us to kind of be able to go forward, right? I think there are 2 specific things which were called out. I think the one important thing is dependency ratio. Over the next 20 years, the number of people who will be working age population to the number of people who are going to be dependent on those people is going to be the lowest for India for the next 20 years. Which means everything that we have to get it done, whether, building up our manufacturing base, really taking up our infrastructure services, we have a once in a lifetime opportunity over the next 20-25 years. So that's one thing. I think the second thing which is really importantly called out is productivity. And, this topic is not discussed upon. I mean, CHROs that I speak to, and one for a very large cement spoke about how a 100 metric ton, business probably requires 100 people, in a European capital, which requires about close to 1,000 people to be able to deliver. Of course, indexed and normalized for automation and so on and so forth, it would still be almost 1:10, right? So I think productivity is a really important norm. I think a really large part of productivity, which is important for us to really understand, is labor force participation. And amongst that, even labor force participation, women participation is even more important, right? And productivity is easily understood. It is the output per unit of capital that you put in, and I think that's the concept. But why is that important? Of course, we speak about us becoming $4 trillion economy. Why is it all per capita? Why is productivity important? And I think part of the reason is, despite the fact that we are the fifth largest, from a per capita income perspective, we are still 135th or something like that, right? In real terms, nominal terms, maybe slightly better, 128. That means the output at an individual level is very low. And I think that's an important aspect of it, as we kind of move forward. And if India at all has to beat China and we have to become, $35 trillion, you have to, if you do the maths, you'll figure out that, which basically means everybody in India is living in Bangalore, right? Because Bangalore has a per capita GDP of about $11,000 odd. So we hope India becomes like Bangalore, minus the traffic, of course. And then, we would have arrived, right, by 2035. So I think that's what we need to achieve, and that's the path we need to go current. The other aspect we have to look at, therefore, and that's quite macro, what's happening to corporate India, if you look at it. I think the number one thing you should look at, and this is, for me, amongst many things, this is the number one most important thing, attrition. Global attrition is about 13-14%. India attrition is 21-22%, and that's an average. India, as you know, is predominantly services. It's 53% services, 20-odd% agriculture, and the balance manufacturing. Of course, we are over-indexing on manufacturing, or at least trying to get there. So therefore, if you look at it from that context, to have a 20% attrition is completely not acceptable at all. And of course, part of it, like I spoke in my introduction, a large part of it is also because India is growing at a fierce pace. And because it's growing at a fierce pace and there's a pool of people available, there is little or nothing that you can do to be able to manage that aspect. But there are certain things that we need to do to be able to make sure our supply side increases. So attrition is number one problem that we're really looking at. Second thing is about being able to hire talent. I think most of us in this room would agree that amongst many things, if in the last few years, especially during pandemic, post-pandemic, the number one function which has disproportionate burnout was recruiting. By the way, that was not just in India, it was across the globe, right? And when you look at from a hiring talent perspective, I think time to hire, cost to hire, quality to hire are all metrics that we look at. And I'll tell you, for my own business, the previous year we had about 28,000 all entry-level workers, 28,000 for the year. But this year, just the first half, we had 28,000. So what we did the entire last year, we did in the first half of the year. Which means, obviously, when you do at that scale, you'll have to compromise on some stuff to be able to hire at that speed and pace. And I think amongst many issues, that's the number one thing that we need to look at, solve for. What is happening in India now as compared to what was happening before? I think one is there is a significant shift which is happening from services to manufacturing. Many of us who chose, did not believe, or perhaps did not take credence as to what's really going to come up from PLI and Make to India, and even if it's important, I want to give you just one statistic, because this statistic is out there in the open. There is so much talked about, which is mobile manufacturing that we are speaking about. Just to tell you what potential there is, in that space alone. You take a small country like Vietnam, right? And the way to kind of do this comparison is to see, saying how much you consume yourself and how much you export, right? India consumes about $50 billion worth of mobile phones every year. I mean, that's our consumption. How much do we export? We export hardly $10 billion. There are two companies who've been doing that, Apple and Samsung mostly. Let's reverse it and look at Vietnam, what it does. Its own internal consumption is only $2 billion. It exports $50 billion. So for a small country like that, with that kind of manufacturing prowess, and for India, you can well imagine saying that EV and some of the other spaces, if we get our act together, I think sky is the limit in terms of us being able to do it. We're just having a chat with somebody. We obviously completely missed the manufacturing part and we moved to services. But there is no doubt about the fact that manufacturing is going to be a real mainstay if you are able to if we need to move ahead and be able to provide, jobs to people, right? I think the other thing which is going to significantly happen is our knowledge, our place in the knowledge economy, right? It used to be that, we were not there with respect to some cutting edge research and so on and so forth. Most of it taking place in the universities abroad and R&D center. I think that part is now changing. Slowly you see a lot of startups which are there in India getting acquired, by multinationals abroad, and even consolidating kind of their space because of the sheer amount of new age research which is going on, whether it is AI, ML, or sustainable energy, or so on and so forth. So I think our place in the knowledge economy is sealed in more ways than one, and I think that's a distinct shift which is taking place as well. I think the third part which is going to take place is we are going to become net exporter of finished products rather than just raw materials. For far too long in the past, I think we were exporting just raw materials. I think that shift is also taking place along with the shift which is happening towards manufacturing. How do we look at being able to accomplish some of these? And there are 3 or 4 points that we're looking at, and these are going to be important from a country perspective. But amongst the several issues that we spoke about, I think as far as corporate India is concerned, I think challenges around attrition, hiring, and productivity are going to be the single biggest challenge that we need to look at solving for. As far as we are concerned, I think there are 3 or 4 very large actions that as a nation that we need to take. I think the number one, and this might be slightly counterintuitive, but it's very important. The number one is going to be able to take jobs to people rather than people to jobs, right? I would not have known this, unless I would have joined the current company that I'm working for. But to give you an example, I think all the young people are actually up in north. All the jobs seems to be in some sense down in south, right? Especially the manufacturing jobs. Now, to be able to kind of move them is one aspect of it. But for India to be able to really grow and have a much more balanced socioeconomic perspective, I think it'll be really important for us to be able to take jobs to people rather than people to jobs. So I think that's one aspect of it. I think the second important aspect of it, which is going to be significantly different for this generation and the generation ahead, is for us to be able to do skill development. I think it's reasonable to expect that many people will have not one, but multiple jobs as they move ahead in their career in the future. I don't think so it will be like what it is in the past, where you join a job and you have only a single role that you do for a longer period of time. I think that's second part. The third part that we spoke about was largely around being able to enable apprenticeship. I think it's important for a country like India to realize saying not everybody is going to have a full graduation and being able to do a post-graduation and then get a job. I think it'll be important for us to be able to enable youngsters who have finished a particular high school, provide them the skills so that they get well-paid jobs. India at 100, therefore, is not just a dream of economic milestones. It's a vision where each Indian, in my view, powered by knowledge, skill, and opportunity, contributes to a narrative of global leadership. As we discuss and deliberate today on people's supply chain issues over the next few years, let's remember that a path to the USD $35 trillion is paid with dreams, aspirations, and hard work of our people. And I think it's important for us to kind of commit to nurturing them, for they are going to be the heart, soul, and engine of India at 100. Thank you so much, and I look forward to listening to all of you.